recording my homily for March 18th. This is for daily Mass. Today we actually had a funeral, so I'm going to give the homily that I gave at the funeral, so that does not necessarily correspond to the daily readings that you would normally see for the liturgy. The gospel was the very, very common gospel used at funerals, which was, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened. Take my yoke upon you and I will give you rest." And so you're very familiar with that gospel. So one of the things I reflected on a little bit was how, when you're at church for a funeral, it's very comforting because everybody is there for the same reason. I mean, to pray, to give thanks to God, but also to grieve together because everybody shared a common love, a common affection for this person who passed away. But as soon as you leave the church, you almost feel isolated, or you almost feel out of place because you realize very quickly that everyone else in the world is not grieving. So when we came outside the church and we're crossing the street to go to the cemetery, because we have the cemetery right across, we have our cemetery, but today we were going across the street to the city cemetery, and you realize people are just carrying on with their daily lives and they're not grieving. And so when we're not sharing a moment, if you will, together in what we're going through, it feels isolating. And so I was bringing that up because I think with the whole coronavirus thing, it's like we're all in some ways grieving. We're all feeling something similar. There's fear, there's concern, there's just a general sense of preoccupation with this, and that can be a positive thing because it can demonstrate that we're united, at least in that, right? I shouldn't say it that way, but that we're united in what's happening. And so when Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are labor and are burdened," come to me. He's implying this desire that we carry our burdens with Him and with our neighbor, with our brothers and sisters, right? The other thought I had on this was, what does it mean to actually come to Jesus and to give Him our burdens, to carry His yoke? What does that mean? I was reading something this morning when I was praying, and I think it captures it. And it was quoting from the scriptures. And there's a scripture that says, show us God, right? Show us God. And then Jesus responds by saying, show me first that you have the capability of seeing God. In other words, we need to demonstrate that we truly want to see God, that we're willing to do what's necessary in order to be able to see God. Are we willing to surrender to God? Are we willing to surrender our fears to God? Are we willing to really give them over to Him? And then we can see God. But there's like this challenge in that. And so when Jesus says, "Come to me," there is an expectation in there that we're actually going to surrender things to Him in order to develop that unity. And that can be challenging for someone who doesn't have any faith. That can actually fear them. Jesus saying, "Come to me," can be very consoling for us. But to someone without faith, it's intimidating. It can be frightening. I see that sometimes even in confession, where somebody can come to confession and they're confessing a sin, and let's just say for argument's sake, it's a sin of holding on to resentments, right? Or holding on to an anger, not wanting to forgive somebody. And then in that, I would say to them, do you really want to surrender it? Do you really want to forgive them? And they may say, no, I'm not ready, Father, I'm not ready. So then they're not ready to take the yoke. They're not ready to come to Jesus. But if they say, yes, I want to forgive him, I want to forgive him, saying, okay, you're ready then to take that yoke, the burden of Jesus, you're ready to take it on your shoulders. You're ready to come to Jesus, right? I do house blessings every once in a while, and I'd say about 50% of the time the family has a dog, right? And I like dogs, so that's no big deal for me. But what I find is the dogs often are very suspicious at first. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm always dressed in black and they're just like, who is this guy, right? And so the dog at first will often want to make absolutely sure that I know that this is their territory. And so they'll bark and they'll sometimes even growl a little bit. And not that I've been bit or anything like that, but the dog really wants to know that this is his place, this is her place, right? And they want to protect it. But as I stay and as I do the blessing and as a lot of times, maybe eat dinner, the dog will have this conversion. And towards the end, not that this happens every time, but some of the times, the dog will actually be lying down next to me and kind of ignoring the family. Now, maybe that's still part of the protective bit. He's like keeping an eye on me. But a lot of times I find that it's like I'm new and there's a certain camaraderie or friendship that forms. And it's not that I'm feeding the dog, food or anything like that. I'm not bribing the dog, but it's like the dog went from hostility to being really close as a friend. So, okay, dumb example, but I think that's kind of what Jesus is getting at. So when we encounter people, or maybe it's ourselves, and we're really struggling, we might at first look at God with hostility, right? So when we see our world do that, let's not become too overly concerned, just like the family's not too overly concerned when their dog is barking at me. It's like, he'll get over it, right? So the same thing is true for us, so that when the train's coming, I got distracted. So when somebody's coming to Jesus, we truly believe that there's going to be this time where they're going to snuggle up to Jesus. They're going to get close to Jesus, and they're going to get to the point where they really want him. They're not suspicious of him. But they really want him. They see him as a friend, right? And so when they hear Jesus say, come to me, it becomes something really beautiful. All right. God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow.